And this can be a big challenge. I mean, these guys look like an NFL defense. I mean, they're big. Big, they're strong, and they're athletic. Other than that, no problem.
That's Kirk Ferentz, the head coach at Iowa, and thanks to the Iowa Hawkeyes YouTube page for that audio from that news conference this week from Kirk Ferentz. Welcome in. Dennis Fithian with you here. Maize and Blue Reviews. Good afternoon. Michigan football today, and we are live. We are weekdays. We're here weekdays at 1 o'clock talking about the latest in Michigan sports, and that's what we're talking about. Midweek here, Michigan getting ready to take on Iowa in Iowa City, the Wolverines' first road game. We'll be talking all about that today. Let's talk Michigan. Let's show you what we'll be talking about specifically as we look at the menu. We will look ahead to not just Michigan's game at noon, but the rest of the interesting games on Saturday. That's ahead this hour. Also, I've got some Hawkeye video queued up from some plays that I was watching last night, and that was against Rutgers in the Hawkeyes Big Ten opener against the Scarlet Knights. But we'll start talking about confidence level, your confidence level in Michigan going into Iowa City and beating the Hawkeyes. A lot of people, myself included in the offseason, when we ranked the schedule, everyone had Ohio State as the toughest, and everyone had Iowa as the second toughest game that Michigan would play. It was on the road, and when you look at the other road games for Michigan this year, the schedule's been one of the hot topics for months. And when you're looking at going to Rutgers, Indiana, and Iowa, and Ohio State, it's tougher to play on the road. We all know that. But since the non-conference slate and going into this game, I've moved, I think most people have, moved Penn State in front of Iowa as a more difficult game. And I would also put, even though Michigan State has had, obviously, their troubles with losing two straight, I would still put that Michigan State game as a tougher game as we sit here now. That one could be debated. You might look at that and say, no. And we know that game is in Ann Arbor, and Iowa might be a better team than Michigan State, but the rivalry plays into it, and we can argue about that if you want. Now, and I put the question up to the people, and if you want to respond to it, I'd be interested just to see where your confidence level is. Just how confident are you in a Michigan victory coming up on Saturday? I'll tell you where my confidence is. If it's a scale from 1 to 100, 100 thinking, like it was Michigan against Hawaii, I was 100. I was 100 against Colorado State. I was 100 against UConn. I wasn't 100% confident that Michigan was going to beat Maryland, but I was pretty confident. Yeah, I'd put it in the, probably close to 90%. So I'll tell you where my confidence level is with Michigan as they get set to take on Iowa. First, two things that I wanted to say. One, yesterday, I was talking about J.J. McCarthy again and the quarterback's two fumbles that he had on Saturday against Maryland. And I had said that McCarthy fumbled twice and Kojo fell on one, but that McCarthy had lost the other one and Maryland recovered. And then when they went to the replay, they had determined that McCarthy's arm was coming forward. That was incorrect. And it was pointed out to me on the feedback. And I said I'd go back and look at it. And you're right. It was not recovered by Maryland. It went down to Oluwatimi, jumped on that ball, and he recovered it for Michigan. They called that one a fumble, and it went down as a fumble, but Michigan didn't lose either of those. So I wanted to, credit or point out. I'm always looking for the correct information. Sometimes I go on here and I say things, and about an hour later I said, did I say that? And I think, I did say that. I want to say the correct information. I'm trying to give you a good dose of entertainment mixed in with good information. So hopefully both of those things, that's what I'm striving for. And in that same kind of line of thinking, I also want to say over these last 2 days, I was thinking like, and some people even pointed it out saying, hey, you don't sound as, I don't know if it was cheerful as, whether it was confident, happy, as you usually are. And, I didn't think about that too much. And yet I was thinking about it today. This podcast started November, so we're almost 11 months in. And when it comes to Michigan football, almost every day talking about Michigan football, it's been like Michigan 100% has been awesome because they have over the 11 months. We started on November 1st, and it was the Michigan had lost to Michigan State the previous Saturday, and then we launched on a Monday, and I was like, oh man. And we were all really hoping, of course, that Michigan was going to beat Michigan State and that we were going to come on. And it was going to be like, wow, Michigan, look at how, and it wasn't that way. But then the other part is that Michigan didn't lose a game, for all that time that we were on. And they finally lost a game to Georgia. But, that game was over so quickly on New Year's Eve. And then, you do some other things on New Year's Eve, kind of move on. And then you're able to look back and say, hey, this was really, even though Michigan just got boat raced in that national semifinal so what was New Year's Eve on a Saturday or Friday by a Saturday, certainly by Sunday. And, coming back on Monday, I was like, hey, it was a good year, all things considered, even though, they lost to Georgia. And then he kind of, I think, even felt even better as they went into the off season and you saw the draft and, Georgia was like, had the most, first round draft picks on the defense and everything else. So it really, there was never a time to really even feel bad, maybe for a little bit, maybe it spoiled your New Year's Eve. I don't think it spoiled my New Year's Eve, whatever. So, but I just wanted to say that. And, Saturday didn't go perfectly or even great, for Michigan, but it went well enough. I mean, they won the game and the argument has been made and I get it. And I agree with it that, it was probably good for Michigan that they went through some issues rather than if they would have just taken Maryland and blown their doors off, everybody would be sitting here like, this Michigan team is awesome. They're going to go and win, down Iowa City by 50. I think that confidence meter would be even higher, than it is right now. So, those are the couple things that I wanted to say. Before I give you my confidence number for Michigan on that scale from 1 to 100, I'm going to take some of the feedback and just see where the people are with their confidence. Chris is not necessarily very confident, but he does believe that Michigan's more than capable, and if nothing else, my excitement is through the roof. And yeah, now that you're into the conference season and, there's no more tune-ups, there's no more anything else. I mean, this is it. And, this is as cliche as it gets, but I'm going to use it anyways. This is what it's all about. It is, Chris. Going into a Saturday or a road game, tough place to play. Michigan is a double-digit favorite, but, there is that part, even though you're not necessarily confident. I'm confident that Michigan can go in there and win. I'm mostly confident because I look at Iowa, and that was the thing in the offseason. When we went into the offseason, there was some point, I don't know, after the spring game, May, I don't know when I flipped. I'd have to go back and look. But originally, in the spring, I said, I think it's really reasonable for Michigan to go 10-2. That sounds like a real reasonable pick. Ohio State and losing at Iowa, tough place to play. Game would probably be at night. I kept saying that. We know it's not now. But I thought, that's not a crazy pick. That's just it was my opinion. And that's what I was going with. I'd say early in the spring. At some point, I kept looking at Iowa and the Iowa offense. It's like the Iowa offense is terrible. And I know it's a tough place to play. And, I know their defense is good. But I kept thinking, is Michigan really going to go to Iowa City and lose to Iowa? Should that be the expectation when Iowa has the worst offense in college football, one of the worst offenses in college football? No. Oh, we know, and we could argue about this too, what the name of the game is. Defense wins championships, but you need firepower. You need offense, and a good offense can cover up for a lot of things. So, at some point, I think before we got to the summer, I said, I think Michigan's going to beat Iowa. And, I still feel like that. And looking at what Iowa has done in their first 4 games, they went out there and beat South Dakota State by 4 points, 7-3, and a real barn burner. Then they had the battle for Iowa. Matt Campbell and company, they lost that game. Again, scoring 7 points. Didn't get the double digits. And Iowa State since then has lost 1 game. That was last week. Iowa State, a respectable loss to number 17 Baylor by 7 points, 31-24. And then Iowa hosted Nevada and blanked them. And then Iowa last week in the Big Ten opener in Piscataway, they allowed 10 points to Rutgers, but they won the game 27-10. Think about that game. I watched the first quarter in its entirety, and then I watched some of the highlights last night. And I've got some of the highlights that I want to play for you coming up, and probably around it looks like about 15 minutes from right now. But just reading the story last night about Iowa's win over Rutgers last week, and this is where I said this yesterday, until you get to at least mid-October, you start talking about all these superlatives for a team. Michigan's got the best offense in the country. Michigan's got this. Michigan's got that. Iowa allowed 23 points in their first 4 games. That is the fewest points allowed in the last 66 years. The Hawkeyes gave up 20 in their first 4 games back in 1956. And Kirk Ferentz was asked about that, and he said, quote, "That's pretty impressive." So clearly the guys are playing at a high level right now, doing a good job. And the 2 defensive touchdowns, it did feel a little bit like Indiana last year, because that's the last time we did that too. So lots to be pleased about. Well, you go back and you have to consider, and a lot of people have done that with Michigan too. They'll throw Michigan's schedule up there and they'll say, well, what are we talking about here? And I think that part's fair to look at and to discuss. Now let's get to, for me, I was, like I said, close to 90%. I'll say, 89% against Maryland. I thought Michigan would win that game, and I thought Michigan's offense would get up to 50 points. And, I thought the Terps offense was pretty good. And I figured that they would get some points. I thought they would get to 27. I nailed it. But I'm not taking any pats on the back for my prediction against Maryland. I picked Michigan to cover the 17 points, and, they didn't. So, I don't know how much, if we're, dishing out credit, for predictions. I don't know how much I, deserve for that one, just like you. Go Blue is talking about a cover and a win, and he is at 94. His confidence level, Go Blue, his name's Go Blue. His confidence level is 94 out of 100. That is pretty high. There's Jackson, who was right. And, thanks for covering us here, Jackson. We are out to get the correct information and blend it with some entertainment. And, you were part of that yesterday. So thank you. Andres is making a prediction, but does not have his confidence level out of 1 in 100. Steven is at an 80%, pretty confident, could be ugly, but also could be a blowout. All right, so for me, on a scale to 1 to 100 was 0, thinking Michigan had no chance, and last week being at an 89, I'm at 75. Just, pretty confident. Factor in the road, factor in, the defense that the Hawkeye has, the defense that the Hawkeyes have, really good linebackers. But, thinking about what Michigan has and how much does Iowa's success over top 5 teams in their last 6 times have anything to do with it. That just means it's a tough place to play, and they also they play a tempo and a game that is from the 20th century that can throw you off. And it's not like remember Army, came in. Everybody's like, you got to watch out for Army. You don't practice the triple option, and then they come in and then they give Michigan fits. And that was an excruciatingly painful game to watch just a couple of years ago when Army came in. They had a chance to kick a field goal at the end. It's not quite to that extreme where I was running, a triple option, but the offense that they run, I mean, it's going to be completely different than anything that Michigan has seen. And, that can tend to, when you're sucking the clock down to 0 every time, and, they're just waiting around for a turnover. If you don't have some early success on offense, that can start playing, tricks on your mind. So Michigan will have to deal with that. So all of that being said, that's where I'm at, is at a 75. So that's my number. Let's see. Andres has now put his number to the scale, and he has come back with a 97. Andres has come back with a 97. Let's just leave that one right there. I like it. A 97 for Michigan confidence level from Michigan fans. Let's take a look at, before we show some of that film, some of the other things to keep an eye on this weekend. Michigan will be at Iowa at noon. We all know that. We'll be on after the game with Jim Scarcelli. Scar will join us tomorrow to talk about, he's played down in Iowa. We'll see what he remembers about that, just what it's like to be out on the field against the Hawkeyes. 3:30, pretty interesting slate of games. You got a top 25 matchup with Bama on the road at Arkansas. We'll see how long the Hogs are able to stay in contention. And then you got a couple opponents for Michigan that you might want to be interested in. I don't know how much of Ohio State and Rutgers I'm going to watch, unless Rutgers is keeping it close, right? And then probably the same thing with Penn State. Watch a little bit of that, but unless Northwestern's keeping it close, I think the majority of my time is going to be spent on Michigan State and Maryland. Like, we look at matchup. I say it's about matchups. Well, if it's about matchups, Maryland is a team that can really throw the ball. They can really attack with their passing game. We saw it last week. Michigan State has the worst pass defense that anybody's ever seen. I mean, it is terrible. So Maryland should kill Michigan State this Saturday. We'll see how that's able to translate just on the, sometimes we look, too close at these games, but on the surface, Terps look like they're going to blow the doors off of the Spartans. And then the late night game, 7:30 game, the primetime game, college football, there is a top 25 matchup. It's number 10 NC State at number 5 Clemson. Clemson had to go into overtime last week. Was that against Wake? I was just looking at the top 25 games last night as I was, prepared to put some of these games up here just to give you a little feel for what you might be watching coming up this Saturday. And it occurred to me that NC State, I don't think that I've ever watched NC State play a football game. I remember when Phillip Rivers there, I would see some highlights. Of course, you see highlights. And Wake Forest, which I just mentioned, I watched them a little bit last week, and they've played a couple games against Clemson. I can remember, when Deshaun Watson was there, that they had, I think, played him right down to the wire and had a field goal. And, I watched, 10, 15 minutes of that game, but I hadn't, up to that point, I don't ever remember watching Wake Forest in a football game at a bowl or whatever. But all the other top 25 teams, I'm like, oh, yeah, I've watched BYU, Utah, all these games, all these teams. But NC State, for as much football as I watch, and I was just thinking, when was the last time I watched NC State? Never. And so it's going to be a first time for everything, and that's going to be me watching the Wolfpack, a top 10 team. I guess they got a pretty good quarterback. I don't know a whole heck of a lot about them, but I'm going to watch them on Saturday night. First time ever watching NC State. So I say I'm looking forward to it. I look forward to college football every week, just like you guys do. Steven thinks Maryland's going to pull the Michigan State game out. Otis says, I've got to see Arkansas beat up on Alabama, maybe. Well, that would be great. I tend to root against Alabama every game. Because even when Alabama loses, like their fans are like, well, clearly we're the best one-loss team, and we still deserve to be there. Alabama can lose 2 games, and they'll be like, we clearly are the best 2-loss team ever, and we're better than the teams that are in front of us. So they're always doing that. Yeah, I root for every team to beat Bama, and then I got a lot of family down in Arkansas, and my niece currently is a sophomore in Little Rock, and she'll be at that game. We'll be looking for. So yeah, there are a lot of reasons for me to be pulling for Arkansas. James is thinking that Maryland by 14 over Michigan State. Todd, this is it. I play the desperation card a lot in the NFL. That's why I think I'm going to pick that's why I'm going to pick the Bengals tomorrow night against the Dolphins, laying the 4 points. Miami doesn't, you could say they need every game, but they don't need that game. I mean, they haven't lost a game yet. They're riding high. They beat the Bills. Meanwhile, the Bengals lost that game to the Steelers. The Bengals have to have that game. If they want to be considered one of the best teams in the AFC, they're at home. It's a Thursday night. The desperation factor is all on Cincinnati. That does play for Michigan State, and yet watching them at home with no pride, getting booed off the field, quarterback issues besides Coleman on offense, is there anybody else that you'd even look at and say, that's somebody that you have to account for? No. And the pass defense is terrible. That was one of the worst performances, and I watched the whole thing. Michigan State last week getting just smacked around and almost shut out by Minnesota. It was one of the most embarrassing performances that I've ever seen from Michigan State. And a couple of years ago, it was the pandemic year. Remember, Michigan State played Rutgers in that first game, and they turned it over like 6 times, and they looked horrible that game. So much so that I thought Michigan's going to kill Michigan State by 50. And that didn't happen. So, yeah, Todd, that's besides the desperation factor, that's it. That's what you have for Michigan State. And yeah, maybe the locker room has already been lost there. I'm not sure. All right, so everything you need to know about Iowa. Like, if we're talking about Iowa and we had somebody on talking about the Hawkeyes, they would say, yeah, well, the offense is a work in progress. They got a couple nice tight ends, and the offensive line, they're Kirk Ferentz. I listened to his news conference yesterday. They're coming along, but Iowa thrives and depends on turnovers by their defense. And I watched this first quarter against Rutgers. I'm just going to watch a minute of it, and it all happens within a minute of real time. Iowa scores a touchdown coming up, and then they show the offense, like, here's Iowa. So it's the most Iowa thing ever. They're winning the game 7-3, and yet in all the statistical categories, like, Rutgers has been moving the ball on them, and Iowa doesn't have any offense, and yet they lead. And then they come back and they do it again, and this is it. This is what Michigan wants to avoid, and this is what the Hawkeyes want to do, and this is what they're talking about and how they can win the game. Johnny, let's roll it. So here it is. Go through it a little bit. So they get this kid here, big hit, Cooper DeJean. Cooper DeJean has interception in 3 straight games. So he gets the interception there. Boom, to the house. 45 yards, touchdown. And now Iowa comes out, and you can see what Michigan's going to want to do here. They just run a couple plays, but then you see their defense is at it again. A little bit, they run for a first. Maryland comes in. I'm sorry, Rutgers. They look a little bit like Maryland. Nice, look like blitz there by the corner. I bet Sandra still will be looking at that. Agent Zero comes in, gets an interception. I'm sorry, gets a sack on Petrus. But here it is. We didn't have to wait long for more playmaking ability by the Hawkeye defense. There it is. Bingo. Pick it up, fumble return to the house, scoop, and score. Touchdown. Kayvon Mayweather. That's it. You want to stay away from that. If it's just like, if we sit here and talk about it, it doesn't feel like there's any way that Michigan can lose this game if they turn the ball over. Now, turnovers happen, but Iowa does not have the offense to win this game by itself. Iowa is going to need a turnover. They might need a turnover and a score. They might need their special teams to have a punt return or a kick return or a block kick for a touchdown. They look for that. They have to have that if they're going to win this game on Saturday, I would think. And why you would feel good about Michigan in the special teams department is they were number 1 ranked last year, according to Football Outsiders, and it's early. And we know the schedule that they played, but they're right up at the top again. I just looked at the ranking. They're ranked number 2 in the country. And why shouldn't they be? They were number 1 last year, and even though they've played a light schedule, everybody's back. All the specialists, the returners, and everything else. So, and the coach, Jay Harbaugh, and they've looked good in that phase of the game. So, Michigan, I feel pretty good about them being able to at least play even. I think Michigan's got better special teams, so I don't think they're going to lose it in the special teams. And the defense, I know people want to see more of a pass rush. I get that. I've been impressed by Michigan's defensive backs. Yeah, would I like to see, better tackling and better play by, the linebackers? Sure. One of those linebackers have been out, Nakai Hill-Green. He could be in for this game. I think as we're sitting here right now, if I'm speculating, and I am, I think he'll play. I think we'll see number 41 in there for the Maize and Blue starting the game. So that'll be a lift for the linebackers. The defense and Mazi Smith, I got a cut from, I mentioned I was listening to Kirk Ferentz talk. This is a minute long, but I liked it as, coach speak. You watch all these and listen to him. I've included the reporter who's just like, he's like, oh, Mazi Smith, he's a freak. And, a couple of years ago, Iowa had Tristan Wirfs, who ended up being the 13th pick in the first round, went to Tampa Bay, started immediately, won a Super Bowl with the Bucs, protected Tom Brady, but they always talked about what a freak he was. So this guy's mentioning Mazi Smith and Tristan Wirfs in the same sentence, and then you just listen to Kirk Ferentz talk about it. It's about a minute of an exchange here, but this is Kirk Ferentz, again, off of Iowa Hawkeyes YouTube, talking with a reporter about Mazi Smith.
They've got the defender, Mazi Smith, I think 55 or 58 or whatever it is. He plays.
The guy that's like 350 or whatever he is. Yeah.
350. Yeah,
looks like a refrigerator. Except he can move. Yeah.
He's like Tristan, the athletic ability. And how do you can't simulate that in practice necessarily. No. What do you discuss? Because you've got such young players in there that, like Jeffrey Simmons going to get Simmons a couple weeks ago.
They're going to find out Saturday. They'll get first-hand experience. But that's always a problem. Like, I joke with our defensive guys, act like you weigh 350. Well, we can't do that. So, and then, to your point with him, he's a freak athlete on top of it. So, all you can try to do is really, rely on your technique, good technique. You got to play with leverage, and we have to be smart in terms of how we try to, approach blocking these guys too. But it's, they're they're a big challenge defensively.
Whoa, there he is, Kirk Ferentz. We got a troll. We don't get many of these, which is interesting, but we do from Charisse, who's coming in and attacking our show with Ohio State, pro Ohio State message and a bunch of emojis. Charisse, I didn't know that you could, I didn't know you could spell. How come you, but let's see, is there any M's that she could have X'd out like what they do, down there? Oh, I didn't even know Ohio State. Is that a Buckeye emoji or is that something else next to the football? Oh, red and white, red and gray. Do they have an emoji with their teeth missing for Ohio State fans? Charisse, that's what it looks like. There's the Buckeye salute, but with one extra finger, not color coordinated, which is no surprise. All of those things. Charisse, if you've got nothing else to do, go on a Michigan pod and type up. It's just sometimes I don't always do this. I usually read. And sometimes you get some Russian bots up there. But since I saw the emojis and it was a football, I just blindly threw up that message from Charisse. What's up, Charisse? How'd you like that game last year, Charisse? What'd you think of Michigan bringing in Ohio State and dragging them up one side of the field and then pulling them down the other one? What's that offseason been like for you, Charisse? Did you enjoy that? I would say that you should be nervous, Charisse, because when it happens again this year, then you will know that your coach and the program is in trouble of Michigan turning this thing around and going on a run like they did when John Cooper was the head coach and winning, 8, 9, 10 games out of 11 against Ohio State. That's the way this series works. So maybe that's why you're on there. I get it. Oh, boy. There you go. Now we're getting into it. Let's see. Don't diss everyone in Ohio. We're not all that bad. That's where Andres is coming in from. Yeah, Otis says it the right way. I love Ohio, not so much for Ohio State. That's right. I've got family members that live down in Ohio. When I was young, I used to like going down to Cedar Point. What else? Anything else I like about Ohio? Yeah, 2 years ago, I drove right through on my way down to Florida. This seemed like pretty smooth roads. Down 75, down through Ohio. That's about all I have to say. Not so much more about Ohio. So there it is. All right. Okay. That made me laugh. I don't know if Charisse coming in. Good to see you. Sometimes it's fun to see the opponents out there and see what they're thinking about and what's happening there. Okay. So that's where I'm at with Michigan as we talk about them midweek. There was some encouraging news on the injury front for Michigan. Cross your fingers, but, things are looking positive in that way. I don't know, like things were looking positive last Saturday, and then they came out and said, no, this guy's not playing, that guy's not dressed. And it's like, oh. But so it's kind of the same thing, except it's a week longer, and you can understand that maybe somebody was being held out, that they were really close. They thought they could get it done against Maryland. I understand that way of thinking. I'll just say, when it comes to Donovan Edwards, when it comes to Carson Barnhart, remember Harbaugh 2 weeks ago, or the week heading into Maryland, said, well, it'll either be this week or next week. He sounded pretty positive about Barnhart, and he wasn't able to play, so you'd think that he would be ready to go. And things were looking really good for Donovan Edwards. And, Donovan Edwards is a special football player. We all, I think, could agree with that. I mean, he could be, the best weapon that Michigan has. It sounded like he was really close to being able to play against Maryland, and whatever. I don't know if he woke up and was just like, just not 100%. I don't know. But there was a part in the game, one of those Corum runs, I don't know if it was the first touchdown run or the second one, that you can see Donovan Edwards running down the sideline, and you see him hopping around. I mean, he looks pretty good. Those, you got to be careful with those things. I've done it over the years. You know how many times I've been watching basketball, and you'll see one of the guys is supposed to have an injured ankle, and he's sitting there in his street clothes, and then you see him during a timeout. He's jumping around and everything, and then the next game they're like, "No, he's still out." It's like, well, what are you doing? Why is he jumping around so much? That's a little bit different. Jumping around in your shoes on the sideline, and getting taped up and cutting, and then how do you feel and everything else. But all that being said, I think there's a good chance of Edwards playing on Saturday, and that would be great news. As good as Blake Corum is, being able to bring in Donovan Edwards, I mean, like, it's great having a home run hitter. It's really great having 2 home run hitters. I don't know. That's it. Trying to explain, or, I think we all know that. Let's just do it. I think Steven is right on top of it. They just decided to hold him out, thinking that they could get by Maryland and give him, if he was, 95%, now, he could be 100 against the Hawkeyes on Saturday. I feel that way too. And, 75%, maybe by Friday, I've ticked that up a little bit, but I just don't think, I would just, if Michigan can protect the ball, I don't feel like that Iowa's going to beat them in special teams, and I don't feel like Iowa has a chance at beating them with just their offense. I mean, there's 2/3 of the game. Iowa's not going to be able to beat them with their offense. They're not going to be able to beat them with their special team. So it's going to have to be the Hawkeye defense. And so Michigan needs to take care of the ball. J.J. McCarthy getting rid of the ball, protecting the ball. Like, I don't know. There's a line, like, you want him to go out there and be McCarthy and be able to play and run, do all the things that he can do. And so you don't want to harp too much on, hey, get down, don't fumble. That's what coaching's all about. Like, when I sit here and we sit here and talk about it, they know how to coach him. He knows what's going on. And the one thing, there's a lot of things, but there's one thing, when I see McCarthy sitting down, and I know that he's into meditation, like, he's able to deal with this. He's whether he threw 4 touchdowns and he was 8 of 8 on passes over 20 yards instead of being 1 of 7. Maybe he had that same kind of mindset, being able to go out there. Joy, I think is what he said. Joy. It's kind of the way I'm feeling today. Joy. And maybe I should have meditated yesterday and Monday. Maybe I need to get back to it. Joy. I've had a good time today talking with all of you. Thanks so much for joining us. 2 things here at the end. We have all of these different podcasts available for you. Check them out. If you look, from recruiting coverage, tomorrow we've got an insider pod. We'll be the gambling pod. I'm excited to do that one on Friday after some of my picks over the weekend. But I like being here a whole lot. I hope to continue. This weekend will mark 11 months, but I want to stay on and keep doing this. Subscribe if you're somebody that's watching this. Even Sharice. Rate the podcast, Sharice. Comment on the podcast, Sharice, like you did. And thanks for everybody for doing that. And if you did not know, if you're watching this and haven't watched it in a while, I always tell you to join the Maize and Blue Review. I think you should do that. If it makes a great gift, you're a Michigan fan, it's day, night coverage, discussion, inside, everything you need to know from Michigan from head to toe. And, oh, yeah. It's free until hoop season. You get full access today. Promo code UMB2B. UMB2B. We're a part of Rivals. We are here live weekdays at 1 o'clock talking about the latest in Michigan sports. Tomorrow, Jim Scarcelli will be here. Scar will have a few plays to look at that he liked from Michigan from this past weekend. And like I said earlier, he'll talk about, when you get those former players talking about going down and playing at Kinnick, they all like, ooh, the crowd's on top of you. And, ooh, so we'll get a little of that firsthand account from Jim Scarcelli tomorrow. Until then, thanks for watching, and